Early life and origins. Alexander Hamilton was born on the small island of Nevis in the British West Indies, a place often overlooked on the map and battered by salt, wind, and colonial hardship. Even his birth remains uncertain. Some records say 1755, others 1757, and Hamilton himself sometimes seemed unsure. But one thing is clear, he was born into poverty and scandal. His mother, Rachel Fawcett, was of French Huguenot descent. She had previously been married to a Danish merchant, but their relationship ended in a complicated and socially unacceptable way. When she began living with James Hamilton, Alexander's father, the relationship was not recognized by church or law. As a result, Alexander was considered illegitimate, a label that carried heavy stigma in the 18th century. It meant closed doors, whispered judgments, and shame that followed him long before he had a chance to prove himself. The family faced constant economic struggle. His father had difficulty maintaining steady work, and although his mother was intelligent and resourceful, her efforts couldn't shield Alexander and his brother from hardship. They moved from Nevis to etched, Croy in search of stability, but tragedy followed. When Alexander was around 11, his father abandoned the family. 2 years later, his mother died from what was likely yellow fever, leaving Alexander and his older brother orphaned and penniless. With no title, no inheritance, and no family stability, Hamilton was forced to survive with the only tools he had, his mind and his pen. Taken in by a cousin for a brief time, young Hamilton faced more instability when that cousin died by suicide. Barely into his teens, Hamilton was left to fend for himself. He eventually found a position as a clerk at the Beekman and Kruger trading firm on St. Croix. Though the job was modest, it became his education. There, Hamilton kept ledgers, calculated currency exchanges, and learned the mechanics of global trade. For a boy with intellectual hunger, it was more than work, it was a real-world school in economics, commerce, and international relations. By the time he was just 15, Hamilton was trusted to run the business while the owners were away. Few teenagers could handle such responsibility, but Hamilton thrived. More than that, he began to write. His letters showed not only clarity and structure but a literary and philosophical depth far beyond his age. When a devastating hurricane struck St. Croix in 1772, Hamilton wrote a vivid and moving account of the storm that stunned readers. His words had the power of poetry and the insight of a seasoned thinker. The essay made its way to local leaders, who were so impressed that they raised funds to send Hamilton to the American colonies for formal education. A poor, orphaned boy from the Caribbean was given a chance to rise, not through privilege, but through genius. That was the beginning of Hamilton's journey, not as a soldier or statesman, but as a survivor whose intellect would carry him from the shadows of poverty to the heart of revolution. Arrival in America and Revolutionary Youth, 1772 to 1777. In the fall of 1772, armed with little more than hope and raw talent, Alexander Hamilton sailed from the Caribbean to the American colonies. He landed first in Boston and soon made his way to New York, a bustling city alive with energy, opportunity, and unrest. Barely 16 years old, possibly younger, Hamilton was entering a world in chaos, but also full of promise. He enrolled at King's College, known today as Columbia University. There, he threw himself into his studies with unmatched intensity. He devoured books on law, economics, philosophy, and political theory, often studying late into the night. But reading wasn't enough, Hamilton was eager to shape the world around him. As political tensions in the colonies escalated, Hamilton found himself in the middle of a growing revolutionary movement. British rule had become increasingly oppressive, through taxes, military presence, and colonial policies. In response, colonial resistance began to ignite, not just in protests but in print. Hamilton joined the fight with his pen. He began writing political essays under pseudonyms, defending the colony's right to resist British tyranny. His writings were so articulate, logical, and forceful that many readers assumed the author must be an older, well-established scholar or official. When they discovered the author was a teenage student, they were astonished. He didn't stop at writing. Hamilton began giving impassioned speeches in public forums, calling for independence and envisioning a new kind of government, one rooted in structure, justice, and liberty. His speeches were bold and visionary, and they earned him growing attention in New York's intellectual and revolutionary circles. But Hamilton wasn't content with just words. He joined a local militia unit called the Hearts of Oak, composed mostly of students and young men. They trained at dawn in church graveyards, practiced with borrowed weapons, and studied British military tactics. Hamilton balanced his academic studies with military drills, preparing both his mind and body for the fight ahead. In 1775, when the Revolutionary War broke out with the battles of Lexington and Concord, Hamilton was ready. He took part in a daring raid on a British artillery battery in Manhattan, helping to capture cannons under enemy fire. It was a bold, dangerous act, and a resounding success. Hamilton had proven he wasn't just a gifted writer, he was also a capable soldier and a fearless leader. Soon after, Hamilton was given command of his own artillery company, an extraordinary achievement for someone so young and without political connections. He led his troops in several key battles, including the Battle of Princeton, where his precision and courage earned him praise from superiors. Hamilton's leadership, intellect, and bravery quickly made him one of the most talked-about young officers in the Continental Army. He was known not only for his brilliant mind but also for his discipline, charisma, and tactical skill. And eventually, he caught the attention of one of the most important figures in American history, General George Washington. That meeting would change the course of Hamilton's life, and, in many ways, the course of the Revolution itself. Washington's aide-de-camp, 1777 to 1781. By 1777, Alexander Hamilton had proven himself in battle and in writing, sharp, fearless, and undeniably brilliant. His leadership in the artillery and his eloquence in political essays drew attention far beyond the battlefield. That same year, General George Washington, Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, took notice and offered Hamilton a position that would redefine his role in the Revolution, aide-de-camp. At first, the appointment might have seemed like a step back. Hamilton had just begun earning distinction on the front lines, and now he was being asked to serve behind a desk. But this was no ordinary desk job. As Washington's aide, Hamilton stepped into the very heart of the Revolutionary War's strategy room. He became Washington's closest assistant, his secretary, advisor, and chief communicator. In this role, Hamilton wielded immense influence. He drafted letters, battle orders, and diplomatic communications, often writing in Washington's voice. His writing was crisp, authoritative, and full of clarity. His correspondence held armies together, resolved disputes among generals, and shaped military policy. He became Washington's right hand, trusted not just for his intellect, but for his loyalty, judgment, and reliability. But Hamilton was never content with influence alone. He burned with ambition, and a desire for personal military glory still lived within him. Despite his deep respect for Washington, he repeatedly asked to return to the battlefield. He wanted to lead troops again, not just write orders for others to follow. Washington, however, refused each request, not out of spite, but because Hamilton had become irreplaceable. He relied on Hamilton's efficiency, vision, and composure in moments of crisis. The two developed a bond akin to that of father and son, built on mutual respect, but also burdened by unspoken tension. Hamilton admired Washington deeply, but resented being held back. The relationship reached a breaking point in early 1781. After a small misunderstanding, Hamilton keeping Washington waiting outside a room for a few minutes, Washington snapped. He harshly reprimanded Hamilton, and Hamilton, already frustrated, resigned from his post shortly after. It was a bold and somewhat impulsive move, but Hamilton saw it as necessary. He had served loyally, proven his value, and now wanted to shape his own destiny. Though he stepped away from Washington's staff, Hamilton didn't abandon the war. He continued to write and advocate, staying close to the army and pushing for a battlefield command. Finally, later in 1781, Washington granted him his long-desired wish, leadership of a battalion. That fall, as the war neared its climax at Yorktown, Hamilton was given the chance to prove himself in combat once more. His moment came during the nighttime assault on Redoubt 10, a fortified British position that stood in the way of American victory. On the night of October 14, Hamilton led the charge, sword drawn, bayonets fixed, rifles unloaded for silence. Within 10 minutes, the redoubt was captured. It was a swift, brutal, heroic victory, one that helped break British defenses and led directly to Cornwallis's surrender days later. The Revolutionary War was effectively won. For Hamilton, the attack on Redoubt 10 was more than a battle, it was redemption. He had proven that he wasn't just a mind behind the revolution, but a fighter on its front lines. He was still only in his early 20s, yet he had served as Washington's closest strategist, built relationships with key revolutionaries like Lafayette and John Lawrence, and now emerged as a hero of the war's final act. But for Hamilton, the revolution was only the beginning. Now that America had secured its freedom, the next question loomed: how would it survive? And Hamilton, restless and visionary, was already thinking about what came next. Post-war nation building, 1781 to 1797. With victory at Yorktown and the eventual signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783, the Revolutionary War came to an end, and America's real challenge began. Independence had been won, but the country was far from stable. For Alexander Hamilton, this was the moment he had been preparing for. The soldier and strategist now turned his sights to building a nation that could survive, grow, and endure. 1. Return to civilian life and legal career. After the war, Hamilton returned to New York and began a career as a lawyer. He quickly distinguished himself through his intelligence, persuasive arguments, and mastery of legal and economic theory. But his focus extended far beyond courtrooms. He was deeply alarmed by the state of the young republic. Under the Articles of Confederation, the federal government was weak and disjointed. States acted like separate countries, printing their own currency, negotiating their own trade, and feuding over borders and tariffs. To Hamilton, this wasn't freedom, it was chaos. He believed that without a strong central government, the United States would collapse under its own weight. So once again, he picked up his pen. The Federalist Papers and Constitutional Advocacy. In 1786, Hamilton helped organize the Annapolis Convention to address the nation's commercial problems. Though few states attended, he used the opportunity to push for something bigger, a full constitutional convention. His efforts paid off. In 1787, representatives from all 13 states gathered in Philadelphia to draft a new constitution. Hamilton was one of the youngest delegates, but also one of the boldest. He delivered impassioned speeches advocating for a strong national government, a robust executive branch, and centralized authority. Many found his ideas extreme, such as proposing a lifetime Senate, but his vision influenced the final structure of the Constitution. After the document was written, it still had to be ratified by the states. Opposition was fierce, and Hamilton knew the fight wasn't over. He teamed up with James Madison and John Jay to write the Federalist Papers, a series of essays defending the new Constitution. Writing under the pseudonym Publius, Hamilton penned 51 of the 85 essays himself, often producing multiple in a week. These writings, clear, logical, and persuasive, remain foundational to American political philosophy and are still cited by courts today. Secretary of the Treasury, Building the Economic System, 1789 to 1795. In 1789, George Washington became the first President of the United States and appointed Hamilton as the country's first Secretary of the Treasury. The challenges were enormous. The U.S. had no national currency, no central bank, no reliable source of income. War debts to foreign nations, soldiers, and citizens remained unpaid. The economy was fractured and confidence in the new government was low. Hamilton saw opportunity where others saw crisis. He immediately began designing a financial system to stabilize the economy and lay the foundation for national prosperity. His most significant proposals included federal assumption of state debts, uniting the country under shared financial responsibility, creation of a national bank, to manage government funds, issue stable currency, and foster economic growth. Implementation of taxes and tariffs, to generate revenue and protect American industries. To Hamilton, economics was not just numbers, it was a form of national strength. He believed that a well-managed economy would lead to stability, international credibility, and opportunity for all Americans. Rise of political rivalries and partisanship. However, not everyone agreed with Hamilton's vision. His policies drew fierce opposition, most notably from Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, who feared a centralized government too similar to British monarchy. Jefferson envisioned an agrarian America, rooted in personal liberty, state sovereignty, and minimal federal interference. Hamilton, in contrast, believed in a strong, industrial, urban nation supported by a powerful central government. These opposing philosophies gave birth to America's first political parties, Federalists, led by Hamilton. Democratic Republicans, led by Jefferson and Madison. Their rivalry transformed the political landscape. Washington, though wary of partisanship, often sided with Hamilton because of his effectiveness. Still, the divide only deepened, turning debates into power struggles and cabinet meetings into battlegrounds. Resignation and continued influence. In 1795, Hamilton resigned as Treasury Secretary but remained a powerful voice behind the scenes. He continued writing, advising, and shaping Federalist policies. His financial system had stabilized the U.S. economy, restored public credit, and established institutions that would last centuries. By the end of this period, Hamilton had written the majority of the Federalist Papers, designed the national economic framework, helped shape the Constitution, and become both one of the most admired and most controversial figures in American politics. But his story was far from over. The next chapter would see scandal, downfall, and a fatal rivalry that would claim his life. Decline and Scandal, 1797 to 1804. Despite his towering achievements in government and finance, Alexander Hamilton's final years were marked by scandal, political miscalculation, and personal tragedy. Though he remained intellectually brilliant and influential behind the scenes, his public image began to unravel, and the decisions he made during this period would ultimately lead to his downfall. 1. The Reynolds Affair, America's first political sex scandal. In 1791, while serving as Secretary of the Treasury, Hamilton began an affair with Maria Reynolds, a married woman who had approached him under the guise of needing financial help. Her husband, James Reynolds, discovered the affair and blackmailed Hamilton, who continued paying to keep the relationship quiet. Years later, in 1797, political enemies, especially those aligned with Thomas Jefferson, unearthed the scandal and accused Hamilton of financial corruption. Fearing for his political reputation, Hamilton made a shocking decision. He published a 95-page public confession, now known as the Reynolds pamphlet, detailing the affair in explicit terms while denying any misuse of government funds. The public reaction was brutal. Some admired his honesty, but many were appalled. His once sterling image as a disciplined, moral statesman was permanently damaged. Worse yet, the scandal devastated his wife, Eliza Hamilton, who had loyally supported him through war and politics. Though she chose not to leave him, their relationship suffered deeply. Political isolation and infighting. After resigning from public office, Hamilton remained an influential figure in the Federalist Party, but increasingly, he became its most divisive one. He grew hostile toward President John Adams, leader of his own party, whom he saw as erratic and unfit. In the lead-up to the 1800 presidential election, Hamilton published a scathing 54-page pamphlet attacking Adams. The move backfired badly. It fractured the Federalist Party and helped Thomas Jefferson, Hamilton's longtime rival, win the presidency. Hamilton's desire to control outcomes had instead cost him his own side's unity. Though he had once shaped the nation's foundation, he was now viewed as a political liability. The rise of Aaron Burr, a brewing rivalry. As Jefferson took office in 1800, his running mate, Aaron Burr, also rose to national prominence. Due to an electoral college tie, the election was thrown to the House of Representatives. Though Hamilton fiercely disagreed with Jefferson's policies, he shocked many by endorsing Jefferson over Burr, stating that Jefferson at least had principles, while Burr had none. Burr never forgot the betrayal. Over the next few years, Hamilton continued to oppose Burr's ambitions, particularly his bid for governor of New York in 1804. Behind the scenes, Hamilton worked tirelessly to block him, writing letters and warning others that Burr was dangerous and untrustworthy. When Burr lost the election, he blamed Hamilton directly for ruining his political career. The duel, July 11, 1804. Following the election loss, a letter surfaced in a newspaper in which Hamilton was quoted as having called Burr despicable. Burr, enraged, demanded a retraction. Hamilton refused. He admitted to criticizing Burr's political conduct but would not apologize for hearsay. Left with no other recourse in the culture of honor of the time, Burr issued a formal challenge to a duel. Hamilton hesitated. He was morally opposed to dueling, had lost friends to duels, and feared leaving his family behind. Yet he also knew that declining the challenge would brand him a coward. In a letter before the duel, he wrote that he intended to throw away his shot, to fire harmlessly, without aiming to kill. On the morning of July 11, 1804, the two men met at Weehawken, New Jersey, the same site where Hamilton's son had died in a duel 3 years prior. The details remain disputed, but what is known is that Burr fired, hitting Hamilton in the abdomen. The bullet shattered ribs, destroyed organs, and lodged in his spine. Hamilton was taken back across the Hudson River and died 31 hours later, at the age of 47. Aftermath and legacy of the tragedy. Hamilton's death shocked the nation. Even political opponents mourned his loss. Businesses closed, church bells rang, and thousands attended his funeral. He was buried in Trinity Churchyard in Manhattan. Aaron Burr, though never criminally charged, saw his political career destroyed. He finished his term as vice president in disgrace, living the rest of his life under the shadow of the duel. As for Eliza Hamilton, she now faced grief, public scrutiny, and the burden of raising 7 children alone. Yet rather than retreat from the world, she began the work of preserving her husband's legacy, a mission that would define the rest of her life. Though Hamilton's final years were marred by scandal and conflict, his death cemented him as one of the most complex and fascinating figures in American history, a brilliant mind undone not by enemies, but by pride, principle, and a fatal shot. Death, mourning, and Eliza's legacy. Alexander Hamilton's death on July 12, 1804, sent a wave of shock and sorrow through the young United States. Though he had fallen from political grace in his final years, his sudden and violent end, in a duel with the sitting vice president, felt both senseless and symbolic. For many, it marked the end of an era. For others, it was the beginning of a reckoning with the cost of pride, politics, and personal honor. 1. A nation in mourning. Hamilton died surrounded by family and close friends, after 31 hours of agony. He had been shot by Aaron Burr in Weehawken, New Jersey, and brought across the river to a home in Greenwich Village. In his final moments, he spoke with his wife Eliza, said goodbye to his children, and received last rites. News of his death spread rapidly. Despite the scandal of the Reynolds affair and his political feuds, Hamilton was still recognized as a founding father, the architect of the U.S. financial system, and a central figure in the Revolution. Thousands gathered for his funeral in New York City. Church bells tolled, businesses closed, and soldiers marched in his honor. He was buried at Trinity Churchyard in Lower Manhattan, not as a politician, but as a patriot. Eliza Hamilton, from widow to guardian of legacy. Hamilton's death left Eliza, his devoted wife, with 7 surviving children in crushing debts. But instead of collapsing under the weight of loss, she turned heartbreak into purpose. Eliza sold their home and began managing what remained of their estate. But more importantly, she committed herself to preserving Hamilton's legacy. She gathered his letters, speeches, government reports, and personal writings. She corrected the public record, defended his role in the founding of the country, and ensured historians knew the full scope of his contributions, not just in politics, but in nation-building. Her work was not passive remembrance, it was active historical preservation. She sought out editors, shared stories with biographers, and helped define how future generations would remember her husband. A personal mission turned public service. Eliza's tribute to Hamilton extended beyond the written word. In 1806, just 2 years after his death, she helped found the Orphan Asylum Society in New York City, the city's first private orphanage. For her, this was deeply personal. Hamilton had been an orphan, abandoned and impoverished in the Caribbean. Eliza ensured that no child in New York would be forgotten the way her husband once was. She continued this work for decades, combining her dedication to family, charity, and memory. Her quiet strength and dignity turned her into a figure of grace in the early American Republic. A life lived for two. Eliza outlived Alexander Hamilton by 50 years, dying in 1854 at the age of 97. Over half a century, she not only raised her children and protected Hamilton's legacy, but also witnessed the very systems he built: banking, constitutional law, public credit, mature and shaped the country. She often told others, when asked how she endured such loss, "I had his children, and I had his legacy." Thanks to her relentless efforts, Hamilton was not erased from history. At a time when many wanted to forget his flaws, or let his enemies define his reputation, Eliza ensured that his vision, ideals, and contributions would echo long after his final breath. Alexander Hamilton died young, but Eliza made sure that his story did not die with him. Her commitment turned memory into legacy, and that legacy became the foundation of how the world would eventually rediscover him. Rediscovery and Modern Legacy, 1854, present. For much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, Alexander Hamilton's name slowly faded into the margins of American memory. While other founding fathers, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, rose to mythic status in textbooks, monuments, and public consciousness, Hamilton became more of a footnote. His party, the Federalists, had long disappeared. His ideas, though foundational, were often misunderstood or attributed to others. But history has a way of circling back. And Hamilton's story, like his life, was never meant to stay buried. 1. A legacy overshadowed. In the decades after his death, Hamilton's political opponents controlled much of the national narrative. Jeffersonians portrayed him as power-hungry, elitist, and too aligned with monarchic ideals. His duel with Aaron Burr, viewed as unnecessary and pride-driven, made him appear tragic, even reckless. These perceptions stuck for over a century. Despite this, scholars and economists quietly kept his work alive. His Federalist Papers continue to be studied in law schools and cited in court decisions. His ideas on public credit and banking formed the backbone of the growing American economy, even if his name wasn't always mentioned. Resurgence through biography. The first significant step toward Hamilton's rediscovery came in 2004, when historian Ron Chernow published the groundbreaking biography Alexander Hamilton. The book offered a nuanced, deeply researched, and humanizing portrait of Hamilton, not as a flawless hero, but as a visionary genius shaped by hardship, ambition, brilliance, and personal flaws. Chernow's work reframed Hamilton as not only a founding father, but the architect of modern American government and finance. The book was critically acclaimed, but its cultural impact exploded when it reached the hands of a young playwright. Hamilton, the musical, a cultural phenomenon. In 2008, Lin-Manuel Miranda, while on vacation, began reading Chernow's biography. By the second chapter, he saw something no one else had, a hip-hop story hiding inside a history book. Hamilton, the immigrant orphan who rose by the power of his words, was a modern underdog. And so, Miranda began writing what would become the musical, Hamilton. Premiering in 2015 at the Public Theater in New York, the show quickly moved to Broadway, and history was made again. With its genre-defying mix of hip-hop, R&B, and show tunes, Hamilton reimagined the founding era with a diverse cast and modern sensibility. The show received 11 Tony Awards, the Pulitzer Prize for Drama, a Grammy Award for Best Musical Theater Album. Audiences were electrified. Students started reading the Federalist Papers. Teachers updated lesson plans. Historians debated, but mostly applauded, the renewed interest in Hamilton's life. Miranda's version didn't just celebrate Hamilton, it humanized him. His insecurities, ambition, and flaws were on full display, making his brilliance all the more relatable. Lines like, "I am not throwing away my shot," and, "Immigrants, we get the job done," became rallying cries. Global recognition and relevance. The musical sparked a worldwide wave of interest. Searches for Hamilton's name spiked, his writings sold again, and tours brought his story to new audiences globally. Former President Barack Obama called the show, "a story about America then, told by America now." Hamilton's grave at Trinity Church became a pilgrimage site. Museums updated exhibits. Classrooms revisited his role in the founding. But most importantly, Hamilton's ideas, strong federal power, economic infrastructure, and visionary governance, began to be discussed not just as historical trivia, but as living principles still shaping modern America. The enduring blueprint. More than 200 years after his death, Hamilton's legacy lives on. The U.S. financial system still operates on principles he designed. The Constitution, and the Federalist Papers that defended it, remains the backbone of American democracy. The $10 bill bears his face, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a tribute to a man who died in poverty after building a nation's economy. Even his contradictions, his belief in centralized power while defending liberty, his immigrant roots combined with elite ideals, mirror the complexities of the country he helped create. Hamilton's story is not one of perfection, but persistence. He was bold, flawed, and relentless. And thanks to those who preserved and reimagined his life, from Eliza Hamilton to Ron Chernow to Lin-Manuel Miranda, he is no longer forgotten. He is not just a man in a textbook. He is a legacy that continues to speak, in law, in leadership, in classrooms, and on stages around the world. Hamilton's relevance today and philosophical legacy. Alexander Hamilton's life was short, just 47 years, but the systems he created, the ideas he advanced, and the questions he posed have echoed across centuries. In today's America, his legacy isn't just alive, it's foundational. His principles shape debates in courtrooms, Congress, classrooms, and campaign trails. And his personal story continues to resonate with anyone who dares to rise beyond circumstance. 1. Architect of modern America. Hamilton's vision for a strong, structured federal government, powered by public credit and economic infrastructure, has stood the test of time. Consider what still bears his fingerprints today: the U.S. Treasury Department. He was its first secretary, and the systems he implemented, like national banking and debt consolidation, remain core to federal finance. Public credit and national debt management. His idea that government debt could be an asset, not a burden, laid the foundation for the American and global financial markets. Federalism. He championed a centralized, energetic federal authority, now reflected in everything from civil rights legislation to Supreme Court precedent. The Constitution. Through the Federalist Papers, he didn't just help defend the Constitution, he helped interpret how it should function. Even 2 centuries later, Hamilton's political philosophy still defines the balance of liberty and law, state and federal power, individual ambition and national unity. The power and pitfalls of ambition. Hamilton's life is a study in ambition, its triumphs and its tragedies. He rose from illegitimacy and poverty in the Caribbean to shape the institutions of a global superpower, using only his intellect, his words, and an unrelenting will. His story embodies the American dream, especially for immigrants and outsiders who are told they don't belong. But his same ambition also cost him dearly. His pride alienated allies. His moral failure in the Reynolds affair tainted his political credibility. And his obsession with legacy led him to a duel he didn't need to fight. His life asks an essential question: can brilliance and virtue survive untempered ambition? A legacy of ideas, not just achievements. Hamilton's true power was never just in policy, it was in vision. He didn't just write laws. He wrote systems. He imagined a country not just free from Britain, but free to grow, to build, to rise through merit, not lineage. Some of his beliefs were controversial. He distrusted pure democracy. He feared populism and mob rule. He embraced executive strength over legislative caution. But he always believed in meritocracy. In his America, your birth didn't define your destiny, your ability did. In a world still struggling with inequality, Hamilton's vision continues to inspire conversations about fairness, governance, and social mobility. A human founder. Hamilton's appeal today isn't just philosophical, it's emotional. He wasn't untouchable like Washington or serene like Jefferson. He was impulsive, arrogant, insecure, brilliant, and driven. He failed. He fell. But he never stopped pushing forward. In that struggle, between ego and ideal, between fallibility and greatness, we see ourselves. His story is ultimately about legacy. What is a legacy? It's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see. Hamilton planted ideas he would never live to see bloom: central banking, federal governance, constitutional endurance. And yet we live in the garden he imagined. Conclusion: the founder who refused to be forgotten. Alexander Hamilton's greatest fear was to be forgotten. Ironically, his life is now among the most remembered of all the founders, not because he was perfect, but because he was real. He was made of ink, fire, and contradiction. A man who built institutions while breaking social codes, who fought for freedom while craving control, who shaped a nation, and died defending his name. In classrooms, in court cases, in song lyrics, and in the $10 bill we carry, his story endures. And as long as the United States continues to wrestle with its identity, its economy, and its constitution, Hamilton will remain not just a figure of the past, but a guide for the future. Conclusion: the legacy that endures. Alexander Hamilton's journey, from a poor, illegitimate orphan in the Caribbean to one of the most influential architects of the United States, remains one of the most improbable, inspiring, and complex stories in history. It is a tale not just of intellect and ambition, but of sacrifice, contradiction, and resilience. And though his life ended in tragedy, his legacy lives on in ways even he might never have imagined. A nation he helped shape. Hamilton never became president. He didn't lead a state, nor win a major election. And yet, few individuals have had a greater impact on the structure and survival of the American Republic. His fingerprints are etched into the Constitution and its interpretation, the modern financial system, the federal balance of power, and the very idea that this country could, and should, reward merit over birthright. Where others saw revolution as the end goal, Hamilton saw it as the beginning. While others argued about independence, he focused on stability, governance, and prosperity. A story that reflects the American identity. Hamilton's life is deeply American. He was an immigrant. He was self-made, with no family name or fortune. He was flawed but unyielding, rising through talent and drive alone. He made enemies, lost everything, and yet never stopped believing in the promise of building something larger than himself. In an era where many seek perfect heroes, Hamilton reminds us that greatness often comes with contradiction. He was brilliant and reckless, visionary and prideful, deeply moral and tragically human. That's why his story resonates. We see in him the tensions we live, between power and principle, between ambition and restraint, between legacy and failure. From the past to the present, and beyond. In death, Hamilton asked not to be forgotten. For a time, the world came close to doing just that, but through the unwavering dedication of Eliza Hamilton, the scholarship of Ron Chernow, and the cultural spark lit by Lin-Manuel Miranda, his voice now echoes louder than ever. Today, he is more than a founding father. He is a symbol of intellectual courage, a reminder that words can change history, and proof that even flawed men can leave behind flawless ideas. Final reflection. Hamilton once asked, "What is a legacy?" The answer, as history shows, is this: a legacy is the sum of your actions, the weight of your ideas, and the lives changed long after you are gone. By that measure, Alexander Hamilton's legacy isn't just alive, it is eternal. He built not just a country, but a framework for future generations to debate, challenge, improve, and believe in. So the next time someone asks, who was Alexander Hamilton? The answer is simple: he was the man who refused to throw away his shot. And in doing so, gave a nation its chance to rise. Timeless lessons from Hamilton's life. Alexander Hamilton's story is not merely a historical biography, it is a mirror. His rise, his failures, his convictions, and contradictions offer powerful lessons that extend far beyond the founding of a nation. In a rapidly changing world, the life he lived over 2 centuries ago still teaches us how to lead, how to build, and how to endure. 1. Words can change the world. Hamilton's greatest weapon wasn't a sword, it was his pen. From essays to legislation, from battlefield correspondence to the Federalist Papers, he showed that clear, persuasive communication can move nations. Lesson: in an era flooded with noise, precision of thought and clarity of expression still hold immense power. 2. Where you begin doesn't dictate where you end. Born illegitimate, orphaned, impoverished, Hamilton had every reason to disappear into history. Instead, he chose to shape it. Lesson: adversity does not determine destiny. Talent, discipline, and relentless effort can shatter the limitations of birth and circumstance. 3. Build more than you take. Hamilton didn't just criticize, he constructed. He didn't stop at philosophy, he drafted plans, wrote laws, created institutions. He turned ideals into infrastructure. Lesson: true leadership isn't about tearing down, it's about leaving something behind that outlasts you. 4. Flaws don't cancel greatness. Hamilton was deeply flawed, proud, impulsive, sometimes arrogant. He made mistakes that cost him dearly, personally and politically. But his contributions to American governance, finance, and law remain undeniable. Lesson: we must allow space for imperfect people to do extraordinary things. Flaws are not the end of a story, they are often its most human part. 5. Legacy is planted, not claimed. Hamilton died before he saw his economic system succeed or his political ideas vindicated. His life was cut short before his reputation could be fully understood. Yet what he planted, ideas, systems, values, grew long after he was gone. Lesson: a true legacy isn't about fame in your lifetime. It's about shaping a future you may never live to see. 6. Courage means acting anyway. Despite fear, doubt, and opposition, Hamilton stepped forward, into war, into politics, into public disgrace, into history. He never waited to be perfect or fully prepared. He acted. Lesson: boldness matters. You don't change history by being careful. You change it by showing up and speaking out. 7. Your story can be forgotten, or fought for. For decades, Hamilton's name faded. What saved it was Eliza Hamilton's unshakable belief that his work mattered. Her refusal to let his contributions be erased is what brought his legacy to us. Lesson: behind every enduring legacy is someone who refuses to let it die. Stories live because someone keeps telling them. Final thought. Hamilton once said, "There is a certain enthusiasm in liberty, that makes human nature rise above itself." His life was a reflection of that very enthusiasm. Flawed, brilliant, driven by purpose, and never satisfied with the world as it was. His story invites us not just to remember him, but to become the kind of people who build the future instead of waiting for it. Because the greatest legacy we can leave isn't what we accomplish alone, it's the inspiration we offer to those who come next.